Hi, everyone. I'm Juan Estrada with District 5 United. Welcome to tonight's Mayoral Candidate Forum, hosted by the San Jose All Districts Leadership Group, with Spanish and Vietnamese translation, sponsored by United Neighborhoods of Santa Clara County. The candidates in alphabetical order are Cindy Chavez, Deb Davis, Matt Mahan, and Raul Peralez. Ramona Snyder from District 1 will be our timekeeper. Candidates, please indicate when you are done with each response by saying thank you. If you use up your time, Ramona will tell you thank you to let you know your time is up. We will begin with self-introductions limited to 2 minutes per candidate.
Good evening. Big problems only get bigger during difficult times. I've certainly learned that as a council member over the last 5+ years I've been in office. And I think we've all learned that during the pandemic. But what I've also learned is that even in the worst of times, good things can happen when we work together. San Jose is facing big problems. We all know that, like homelessness and blight. And City Hall must begin to help, not hinder our growth. We must work together because it is time to restore San Jose's status. We must be a safe, clean, and thriving San Jose. To restore San Jose, as mayor, I will focus on rebuilding public safety, protecting our single-family homes, and tackling our growing homelessness problem. I will not waste time on ineffective and costly new policies like new gun owner mandates and non-citizen voting in local elections. The future of our city is too important to waste time. Although I was born and raised in North Dakota, my husband and I found our home in San Jose 18 years ago. And we are happy to be raising 2 California natives, our 2 teens, a son and a daughter. I'm working to leave our kids and your kids a city to be proud of, a city that is safe, clean, and thriving. I look forward to our conversation this evening, and I want to thank the All District Leadership Group for bringing us together this evening. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And next, Matt Mahan.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to the All District Leadership Group for inviting us here and to everyone who took the time to be part of this conversation. I want to give a special shout out to the District 10 Leadership Coalition, who I've partnered really closely with over the last year to expand our neighborhood associations and invest in our community. My name is Matt Mahan, and I'm the council member for District 10, representing Almaden Valley and the Santa Teresa Foothills neighborhoods, where my wife Sylvia and I are raising our 2 little kids, Nina and Luke. I'm running for mayor because our city is heading in the wrong direction and our local governments are failing to get the job done. I probably don't need to tell you what isn't working. You see the sprawling homeless encampments, trash and blight, addiction and mental illness that's going untreated, crime that's going unaddressed, high cost of living, and fundamentally local government that is failing to deliver on its core responsibilities. I am running to take on the culture of complacency that has taken root at City Hall and to ensure that we deliver high quality services and a high quality of life to all San Joseans. To do so, we need to be radically more focused and accountable for results. I believe that unless we can meet our ambitious goals for key goals that we set when we approve our budget, those of us in elected office and senior city staff shouldn't get raises. You're going to hear a lot of the same ideas tonight, a lot of policy nuance, but I hope you'll just ask yourself, who has the experience and the mindset to create accountability and results at City Hall? Because that's really what's missing today. I hope you'll join our revolution of common sense at mahanforsanjose.com, and I'm looking forward to the rest of our conversation. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you. Next is Raul Peralez.
Yeah, thank you very much and good evening. Pleasure to be here with you all tonight, and thank you for giving up your evening as well to join us. I'm proud to be a lifelong resident here in the city of San Jose. My father immigrated from Mexico and grew up poor in a trailer park in Alviso, North San Jose. And my parents had both my sister and I as teenagers And we grew up very humbly as a working class family over in West San Jose in a rent controlled fourplex. And I had the great privilege of being the first in my family to be able to graduate from college right here at San Jose State University, graduating with a degree in mathematics. And I have spent my entire career serving our community, starting off as a high school teacher, a substitute high school teacher here, and transitioning into subbing alternative ed in the county, which is community day schools, the Boys Ranch, and juvenile hall. I went back to school to become an emergency medical technician, and that's what led me to my next career, which was as a San Jose police officer, where I proudly served as a full-time officer for 8 years, and I have continued to serve now as a reserve officer for the last 4 years. In 2010, when the recession hit, I received a pink slip from the city notifying me that I would potentially be terminated from the city. And that's really what spurred my initial interest and involvement in wanting to be a part of our local political landscape. In 2014, I took a chance and ran for office and have been proud now to be serving as your downtown District 3 City Council member for 7 years now, on my 8th and final year. I have been able to see the impact that a mayor can lead in a city, to be able to create change, direct policy in the budget that can impact our city for decades to come. And for me, the issues that we're facing today are personal. I'm now raising my family, my 3.5-year-old son, and a brand new 5-week-old daughter. And I am happy to be here with you tonight, and look forward to engaging with you. Thank you.
Next, we have Cindy Chavez. Cindy, you're on mute,
you're
so we'll
muted.
restart.
Thank you so much. You would think I would have caught that one earlier, but thank you. I'm just delighted to be with all of you this evening and with my colleagues running for mayor. I appreciate that you could all be doing something else this evening and you're choosing to invest in your community. Just to give you a little bit of background about me, when I was growing up, my father was a carpenter and my mother was a teacher's aide, and they were great role models. And their values really have helped shape my life. Our home was the place in the neighborhood where all the kids could come after school, and everybody knew they were welcome. When someone needed support, my parents were there to help. And I have so many examples that it became very commonplace to me. I didn't know that everybody's parents didn't do this, which is one, my parents took in 3 small children when a neighbor was diagnosed with cancer and they had to travel for experimental treatment. And over the years, we took in several families as they were saving for a place of their own. And by watching my parents, I learned that it was really important, if you wanted to be part of a community, to be all in. And that if your community was going to be healthy, it was because everybody was healthy. I run a nonprofit. I've led the labor movement. I've served as a member of the San Jose City Council. I am now a member of the Board of Supervisors. I've had the opportunity to work with many of you trying to make our community better. I'm running for mayor because you have demonstrated, and so have I, that leadership can change lives and save them as well. Thank you for letting me be with you.
Thank you. Now we will begin with the questions.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Joan Rivas-Cosby from District 3. You will each have 3 minutes to respond to our city staffing question. The city of San Jose has over 700 vacancies across city departments that contribute to the detriment of quality of life issues, such as the proliferation of abandoned vehicles, an inadequate level of services provided by San Jose Animal Services, lack of sewer maintenance, and not enough park rangers, as just a few examples. How do you propose to address this staffing shortage, and how will you make employment with the city of San Jose compelling to applicants? We will start with Councilmember Mahan, Peralez, Supervisor Chavez, then Councilmember Davis.
Thank you, Joan. I appreciate the question, and I think it just shows how keyed into what's going on at City Hall this group is, because it is a fundamental challenge we face. And there are a lot of things we can do better as an employer. In my short time on the council, I have seen even just getting the onboarding process right so that a new hire on my team doesn't have to wait 2 weeks to get a laptop has been a challenge. So there's clearly significant room for optimization, but I want to focus in on two big areas of improvement that I see. And I'm a former CEO, founder of a company, ran a couple of companies, have been involved in building workplace culture, hiring and retaining talent in our valley, and know something about what it takes to build a healthy organization and retain people. And the two things I would focus in on are compensation and workplace culture. On the compensation front, it's no mystery that this is an expensive place to live, and we're struggling to compete just on an entry-level base salary for folks. And so we're going to have to pay better, but to do it is not going to be straightforward. One, we're going to have to invest in unlocking economic development in places like downtown, streamlining our permitting and building processes so that we can attract the investment to organically grow our tax base so that we can pay our employees better. We also have to focus on fewer priorities. If we have fewer services, we can better staff them and better pay those folks. I think we need to reform the way that the workplace works in terms of compensation and promotion. It should be more tied to performance and less of this 20th century step and ladder model where your pay is largely driven by just how many years you've been there. And so there's a lot around compensation that we can do better. One other I'll add on is we have traditionally backloaded compensation on retirement benefits when really, if we're going to attract talent in a time when people don't tend to spend 30 years in the same job, we're going to have to front load it and better distribute it across someone's time with their employer. The other piece, though, I think is as important, and it's something we can do immediately, because increasing compensation will take time. It will take growing the economic pie locally and focusing on fewer things, all of which are difficult. On modernizing the workplace, I mentioned I built a couple of companies here, and I have learned that employees of all ages, and especially younger employees, want to be connected to the mission of the work that they're doing. They don't want a process-oriented bureaucratic workplace, which unfortunately is almost by definition how we're running things at City Hall. They want to understand the purpose of their work, see the impact they're having, and have some creativity and autonomy in the way that they're working. They want to be able to use modern tools like the Google Suite for, that most of you probably use Gmail or Google Docs, that we need to not wait 18 months to allow an employee to use a new tool to do their job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Peralez?
Yeah, thank you, Joan. I wasn't sure if I should just begin. So the biggest challenge today is actually not with recruiting. Unfortunately, it's actually a bottleneck in the interviewing and hiring process. Today, we simply don't have enough staff collectively to be able to onboard 700 vacancies fast enough. We have, over the last couple of years, actually allocated more resources to help beef up our human resources department to help with that onboarding process. But the onboarding process also depends on having representatives from each and every department to be able to participate in this process. And that's where we are continuing to get stalled. In fact, there was a discussion on this recently within the council. It is a priority that I have had over the last couple of years to be able to focus resources on filling those vacancies and being able to remove that bottleneck and address this vacancy shortage. And I will continue to actually prioritize that in this upcoming budget, as I've indicated when we discussed the mayor's budget message earlier this month. Unfortunately, though, even with those vacancies filled, we still will have one of the most thinly staffed big city workforces in the entire country. And we need to continue to beef up our workforce. And in order to do so, we need to generate more revenues, and we need to direct that exactly where we need it, which is to our workforce. We need to be more competitive in our salaries. We are competing with a number of other cities and private companies, specifically private companies that can pay more, or other cities that are smaller, their workload is less, and our employee base is being drawn into those areas. We need to remain competitive in our pay and our benefit packages. But most importantly, and I know this as a former city employee for 8 years, our workforce needs to feel valued and supported. And having that coming from our leadership is really where it makes the biggest difference. I was an employee here in 2010, as I mentioned, when I received a pink slip from the city, but it wasn't that was the most detrimental to our workforce. In fact, it was the messaging and the rhetoric and the vilifying of public employees that came from our leadership, from our mayor, namely. And that is what drove the highest exodus of city employees that we've ever seen in our history. We laid off around 80 police officers that year. And within the next few years, we had several hundred resign and move on to other cities and jurisdictions. We need to ensure that our employees are feeling valued, that we are incorporating them in these decisions that we make, and that we create a workforce that wants to remain with us. Thank you.
Supervisor Chavez. You're muted, Supervisor.
I will catch on. People go where they're appreciated. And one of the challenges that we've had here that Councilmember Peralez just touched on is that when we had the economic bust, the leadership in our city chose to scapegoat the employees instead of rallying people together to try to solve and address these problems. And in particular, there was an opportunity to really solve these problems at the bargaining table, and the leadership opted not to do that. With these 700 vacancies, let me just talk about the fact that we're going to need to have a short-term, a mid-term, and a long-term approach. First, we have to treat workers who work for us with respect. We have to think about career ladders, creating opportunities for people to learn, and engaging employees in goal setting, line staff in a very real and meaningful way. Second, we should prioritize those 700 jobs so we can focus our energy on the highest need, both, for example, in public safety and planning, building, and code enforcement. And we should work with the line staff to determine what are the best interim solutions. And so, for example, in some areas, it may make sense to do a contract for folks until we can bring permanent employees on. In others, where we know we're losing really experienced people, as soon as they get experienced, they leave our region, we should be thinking about longevity pay and other strategies that make sure we can keep the best and the brightest working with us. The other is that as it relates to opportunities for shared services, if we think about folks like park rangers, the county has park rangers, the city has park rangers, and I think the water district even has some kind of oversight along properties that they own, and looking to see whether or not we can collaborate and coordinate and do contracts amongst each other as we get momentum to fill vacancies. And then in some instances, determining what agency has the most experience to be able to continue that body of work. And perhaps that allows other organizations like the city of San Jose or the county of Santa Clara, the water district, or others to be able to use their resources in a different way. Because no matter where the tax dollar comes from, it still ultimately comes from us. Thank you.
Councilmember Davis.
I think it's important to note that the city has 11 bargaining units, and that means fundamentally it is not like a business. We cannot run it the same way as a for-profit business. The mayor is not a CEO, and we don't have the my way or the highway attitude just is not going to work. It is important to note that things like meaningful changes in pensions do have to be achieved collaboratively and at the bargaining table. I think that's really important because it's important to note that relationships are what get those changes done at City Hall. We need to be doing exit interviews with staff who are leaving to find out where we are deficient, and we need to address those issues, especially in departments, as Cindy talked about, where we have people just staying for a short amount of time and then jumping ship. Second, and it's super basic, but we actually need to advertise on more job sites than we currently are outside of the City of San Jose website, which obviously, probably does not reach a very wide audience. Third, we have over 700 vacancies, but what we recently learned is that fewer than 100 positions are open at any one time, and they're not even posted because HR doesn't have the capacity to handle all the open positions at once, given their current structure and hiring process. Councilmember Peralez talked about that a little bit. So we absolutely need to review that process to see how we can have more positions open at one time and get people through the door more quickly. And utilizing outside help temporarily until our vacancies decrease to a manageable level is something that we need to continue doing. But I think that staff development is very important for people, and we need to continue to work with HR to have more programs for staff enrichment. Notice that I didn't mention salaries. While we do need to be competitive with other government agencies, people don't stay in the city solely for money. I know I don't. That's why my colleague's proposal to withhold raises for council and senior staff just rings hollow to me, whether we meet targets or not. Firstly, the council's raise last year was $42 a week. More importantly, I didn't run for office for the money. I can't speak for my colleague, but for me, it's about service. It's about loving our city and wanting to help make it better. As council members, we put in close to 70 hours per week. Sometimes it's many more. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Juan Estrada from District 5. You will each have 3 minutes to respond to our environment question. There are multiple components. First, San Jose has an adopted riparian setback ordinance and policies for the city's creeks and rivers to protect the natural habitat, reduce flooding hazards, and enable creekside trails. Recently, however, the city approved a large office complex that is inconsistent with the ordinance and policies, and the city itself is also proposing a project that is inconsistent. What are your views on the riparian corridor policy? How would you direct the city to balance the needs of nature and development? Would you direct the city to enforce or modify the setback policy? The second component will be the council pledged to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Natural gas in buildings is the second largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in San Jose. Do you support or oppose the electrification of existing buildings, including changing natural gas appliances to electric appliances? And then third, just a yes or no, do you support sunsetting the exemption that allows gas-powered fuel cells in new buildings? And lastly, yes or no, should San Jose, like other California cities, ban gas-powered leaf blowers? And first up will be Raul Peralez.
Thank you, Juan. I am supportive of our riparian corridor policy, and actually I helped to pass that a number of years ago here at the council. I do believe it is a good rule of thumb to govern by, but even still, there are circumstances where I feel we should weigh out the options, especially I think in the downtown core where we need to be flexible. We intend to want to preserve our areas outside of our urban growth boundary, and in doing so, we have goals to densify in our downtown core. And I would not direct us to modify that policy. I do believe it should be followed, but I do believe there are also cases in particular where we may have to override when necessary. In regards to the net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, I am supportive and was supportive of our gas ban on all new construction. And I do support our goals in attempting to transition current gas appliances to electric appliances. I want to make it clear, because I know there has been some misunderstanding, that this is a requirement that the city has put in place. That is not the case. It is a goal. We are attempting to achieve that and encourage people and incentivize people to be able to transition from their gas appliances when they are already at end of life and they're going to be purchasing new ones, when they're doing additions or new builds. And I do support that because it is going to be crucial for us to eliminate our use and our reliance on natural gas and other natural resources if we are going to achieve those net zero goals by 2030. And yes, I do support the sunsetting of the exemption. In fact, I was one of the few original votes that disagreed with that exemption being put in place in the first place. And yes, I do believe that the city of San Jose should ban gas-powered leaf blowers like other cities. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next is Cindy Chavez.
Thank you. First of all, I think the riparian policies are very important. And I do just want to appreciate Councilmember Peralez and other leaders for putting that in place and strengthening it. Obviously, we need to protect for floods and water quality and to protect natural resources. I think one of the challenges with the recent actions is that there's not clear reasoning for deviating from the policy versus when you stay with the policy. And so, it can't be based on a developer, it's got to be based on some clear issues that the council wants to deal with. For example, public safety, and or when you have real and meaningful mitigations, again, that are transparent and that all parties agree can be met. So I think, so in any case, I'm supportive. I wouldn't say that it should be redone. I do think, though, that it needs to be more clear under what circumstances changes would be considered or deviations would be considered. As it relates to electrifying buildings, the county's also adopted REACH codes. I think it's really important that for buildings that are already in place, that we really move to educate people, excite people about the opportunities, help people understand what they are, and that we're thinking a lot about using incentives. We have a lot of folks who are on fixed incomes, and just the thought of this being mandatory is sort of terrifying for them. So I think we need to create a coalition of the willing. And the other is, I think there are a lot of folks who were raised thinking that it was better to cook on gas versus electric. I don't cook well on either, so it doesn't really matter. But I do think even good demonstrations about how to use electric appliances and electric cooking is really going to be more the way we're going to get people excited about this change. And I think incentives are really important when we're changing out appliances. As it relates to sunsetting, I'm very comfortable with that. I think that's really a good idea. And then last, I think the question was around the let me just look at my notes because you sent them to us. Thank you. About California banning the gas-powered leaf blowers. I think that we should do that, but I also want to just honor that these are, most of the times people using them have very, very small businesses. These are a really important part of the way they meet the needs of their families. And so again, I think for small businesses in particular, there should be incentives to allow for an easy transition to a new technology. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Deb Davis.
Thank you for the questions. We do need to balance nature and development in our downtown core and along our riparian corridors. I do think the city should enforce the setback policy when it can, but we have to acknowledge that there are laws in place that allow development to move forward if the property is deemed undevelopable by the riparian policy, and given those setbacks. And so at that point, it's important for us to work with the applicant on mitigations like bird safe design that would help produce a better product and limit the city's liability for not allowing the development. So I think the mitigations are an important piece of that. In terms of the net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, I supported, and I know it's a little bit controversial even to support the all electric measure for new buildings, but I did support that because I think it's important for us to start making a transition. However, I was the person who raised the alarm about the existing building electrification because the original draft plan did talk about mandates, not about phasing out, but actually about mandates for electric conversion by 2030 for existing buildings, including our homes. But I think soon to talk about those kinds of mandates for existing homes to make a full shift from gas to electric. One of my other colleagues mentioned the cost for families and seniors, not to mention the cost for mobile home park conversions that has the mobile home park community, both the owners and the residents, very concerned about a requirement for conversions actually putting those mobile home parks out of business and closing mobile home parks. I don't want that to happen. But also, at this time, our electric grid is unfortunately too unreliable and unlikely to be able to handle the additional load from all of our dryers, furnaces, and stoves converting to electric. So I'm concerned about that. That's another reason why I'm actually not in favor of a sunset for the exemption for fuel cells, because the grid is too unreliable at this time, and we don't know, we don't have a timeline for when it is going to be reliable enough for the 24/7 uninterrupted power supply that places like our data centers locally need to keep operating and to stay in business. And we need those businesses in San Jose. And in terms of banning gas-powered leaf blowers like others, I think we should do that, but only if we have a program to help those small landscaping businesses to make that conversion without putting them out of business. I think it's really important to support our small business owners. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next is Mahan.
Thank you for the questions. On the riparian corridor, I support the policy and I don't think that it should be diluted, but I also think that particularly in places like our downtown, particularly on those narrow parcels near the river, we will need the ability as a council, as we have recently done unanimously, to use our judgment to decide when the overall benefit to the community and frankly to the environment, because we know when we put jobs and housing more densely in transit supported areas like downtown San Jose, we actually overall make bigger and more important progress against our climate goals. We need the ability to have some flexibility. Our policies, good policies, provide a framework, they provide guidance, but they aren't an inflexible straitjacket that should always be blindly followed. That's why we're elected, is to be able to have discussions and debates, hear from staff, and exercise our judgment in those cases. On the 2030 carbon neutrality goal, when this came before council last year, I was, I think, the most vocal member, certainly one of the most vocal members of the council in raising the question of how are we going to get there? And I know there is a way to get there, but I want to see the math before we simply sign up for a goal. I think it's a good aspirational goal. It's certainly the target we want to set, but I would like us to be honest with ourselves about the investments that are needed, the policies that will have to take place, and we should push ourselves, but we should be responsible and really think about the impact on the most economically vulnerable members of our community. So that goal is a good one, but I think that we're going to have to phase in new technologies, make infrastructure investments. This is a long game. We're not going to just do it in 5 or 10 years. This is literally a 2 or 3 decade process for humanity, and we want to lead the way, but we should do so in a research-based, data-driven way. And so I do not support the forced conversion of gas appliances in people's homes. I think they should be phased out when they're at the end of their natural lifespan. As for sunsetting the exemption on gas-powered fuel cells, I think that makes sense. I think we ought to set a date out in the future that creates a signal to the marketplace and creates an incentive for them to transition away from using gas to fuel those hydrogen fuel cells and to replace them with renewable sources. But that, again, has to be a gradual process, and we want to support innovation and investment in the energy space because we need it. The truth is, we're not there today with the technologies and infrastructure necessary to fully make this switch. We have a long way to go. So we want to incentivize it, not mandate it, and take our time to do it responsibly. And then finally, on gas-powered leaf blowers, we created a community working group. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bobbi Atak. I'm with the District 9 Leadership Group, and you will have 3 minutes each to answer our questions on homeless and unhoused question. How will you address the homeless and unhoused situation, illegal dumping at encampments, and any impacts to our neighborhoods, along with the need to keep our waterways like the Guadalupe and the Coyote waterways clean? What are your thoughts on Governor Newsom's proposal to compel some of these individuals into treatment and housing? Supervisor Chavez.
Bobbi, thank you for the question. I'll start with the, oh goodness, okay. Unmuted. All right. I'll start with the, with our waterways. And let me say that one of the challenges that we have, and we just have to acknowledge this, is that we have people living outdoors because we don't have enough housing for folks. So we just really have to focus on making sure that we continue to prioritize building permanent housing, building interim housing, and keeping people from being homeless in the first place. As it relates to the rivers and our natural resources, we do need to prioritize the safety of those encampments, the degradation to the natural environment. And we need to make sure that we clean up those encampments where we see that we must in order to protect those both safety and the natural world. Just one point on that, we are in the process of rebuilding Anderson Dam. And when Anderson Dam starts to be rebuilt, you're going to see less water in Coyote Creek. And that means that Coyote Creek is going to be at a much greater risk, I think, for being negatively impacted by encampments. The other problem we're going to have is it's going to be much more difficult to control how much water is coming in and out of the dam, which means that it will also be less safe for people who are homeless to be along it. So one thing that the county's working on, and I believe the city is doing this too, is we're working on creating some agreements with the water district that give us much more flexibility in terms of being able to clean up shared areas. And one challenge we have is there's so many property owners along each creek that it makes it really difficult to get in there and decide when and where and how and who's going to do cleanup. So one of the opportunities I think we have with Anderson Dam is to get all of the property owners, including private property owners, to sign up to allow for more flexible interactions, allowing us to make those cleanups safer and more effective, and also being able to manage the cleanups over a longer period of time. Just to talk about Care Court for a moment, Care Court's a proposal that's still in process of being developed. There's an opportunity there, and I think the opportunity is if the state government will do a little more to make it easier for us to compel people to get services. And this is really focused on folks who are schizophrenic or have other psychotic disorders. One thing again I'll say is that for folks who are homeless, we're going to need actual housing, not just housing plans. And Care Court really focuses on a plan instead of an outcome. What I like about it is I think it's going to give us an opportunity to get better at caring for the highest need people in our community.
Thank you. Councilmember Davis.
Thank you for the question. To tackle homelessness, we need to focus on safety, sanitation, and services. For safety, everyone needs to be sheltered, whether it's in interim or permanent housing, or less ideally at a designated safe parking site. Sanitation, like trash, bathrooms, and laundry services, can be cost effectively provided at all these shelter solutions. And I say shelter because they're not all housing, right? A designated safe parking site is not housing. But camping along our waterways, our parks, or on our streets is neither safe nor sanitary and should not be allowed if shelter is offered. Along with safety and sanitation, all types of shelter sites need to provide services. These services need to help people reintegrate back into society, to take care of the root causes of their homelessness, whether those were employment related or physical or mental health related or addiction related causes, or some combination. But social services like that are in the county's purview, and we need to work together between the county and the city to ensure that we have a strong partnership. As mayor, I will work to forge a stronger partnership with the county to ensure that we are working arm in arm to alleviate homelessness so that we can provide safety, sanitation, and services for homeless individuals. We have to pool our resources to provide those things so that people can have a better quality of life beyond living on the streets. Regarding Care Court, I am not one who always agrees with our governor. In this case, though, I do support the Care Court idea. I think it needs to be for judges to be able to order not just mental health treatment, but also addiction services and treatment for homeless people, even if they don't want it. I'm sure some of you, like me, have had a family member who has been mentally ill or had an addiction, and they don't always seek out treatment on their own. But when they start getting treatment, it can be very helpful, and they want more of the treatment and to have a different way of life. So I want to talk a little bit about quick build apartments, because some people have talked about them as if they are a panacea and going to solve our problem. We've built 3 sites of quick build apartments during the pandemic for a total of 345 beds. We have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10,000 people in our county who are homeless, with about 2/3 of them likely in San Jose. We'll be getting new numbers soon. Quick build apartments are one strategy, but that alone will not solve our homelessness problem. We have to build permanent supportive housing to get everyone permanently housed. Thank you.
Councilmember Mahan.
Thank you for the question. I think that street homelessness in our community is the greatest example of government's failure to hold itself accountable to addressing a problem. We call it a crisis, and yet we are moving incredibly slowly and often in the most expensive and slowest ways. We're spending a tremendous amount of money, on the order of $1 billion, building brand new apartments at a cost of $850,000 a door, and 5 years to build brand new apartments for each homeless person who we want to get off the streets. We have to be radically more innovative and cost effective. We have to do cost-effective shelter on government-owned land, including sites like the county fairgrounds, but not exclusively there. I don't think we can scale up the solution in one place and concentrate it. We need an equitable distribution of transitional housing sites, inpatient treatment facilities across the county, not just in San Jose. San Jose has historically taken on more than its fair share of supportive housing, services, and all the rest. And I think that the county has to play the lead role in identifying those sites on publicly owned land, building adequate individual dignified shelter for individuals, a private space, the modular unit with a door that locks. And then we have to expect and hold our homeless population accountable for accepting shelter when it's provided. Our current approach is failing, and we have to be willing to admit that doing more of the same is not going to solve the problem. My 3 colleagues here have a collective 34 years in office locally, and the problem has only grown worse under their watch. So it is time for new solutions. I'm not talking about criminalizing homelessness, but we have to be radically more pragmatic and cost effective. We have to build modular transitional sites across the county on government-owned land at a fraction of the current cost. We have to have those inpatient services that the governor is calling for, and we have to help people get the care that they need. And right now, it's a revolving door over at the jail and in the court system. You can ask SJPD, and they will tell you they're picking up the same people on the streets every day, and there's nowhere for them to go because our services are voluntary. I have had direct experience with friends and family members suffering from addiction and mental illness. They're not going to suddenly, especially when it's really severe, just voluntarily say, I'm ready for help. Sometimes that happens, but there also has to be accountability. We have a responsibility to protect the broader community from the harm that individuals cause when they are severely addicted or mentally ill. That has to be part of the conversation. We are not being pragmatic or accountable enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Peralez.
Yeah, thank you very much. First off, I want to say the one challenge that I just heard with Councilmember Mahan's statement is that We can't force people to take housing or shelter against their will. And we would have to arrest them to force them to do that. It's just illegal in this country. Simply because we build a tiny home shelter doesn't mean that we can now force somebody that is currently homeless to move into that. The solution is just as complex as the challenge. And I think we need to focus on three things specifically. I have also fought against our current mayor, who has admitted last year in his State of the City address that his biggest failure during his tenure has been his address and the challenges with homelessness. And I have been pushing back with solutions over the last 7 years, and these would be solutions that I would champion as mayor. Number one is sanction encampments. What we're doing today simply isn't working. By going out to encampments and abating them, all we're doing is shuffling people around, and a lot of times we just clean up a location, and within 24 hours, people come right back. That is, as a failed solution, it's not a solution at all. We need to be able to give people an alternative location to go. And we know today, we simply can't build enough solutions of permanent supportive housing, emergency interim housing, the tiny homes, hotel, motel, conversion rooms. We just can't build them fast enough. So we need that first entry level solution of sanctioned encampments to be able to redirect people to, if we truly believe we are going to clean up the challenges that we have with the illegal encampments that are spread throughout our entire city today. Secondly, we need to multiply our efforts on building solutions. Those solutions are the permanent supportive housing, number one. We need housing options. We need to have a ladder that gets us to that permanent supportive housing. Ladders like the emergency interim housing solutions, hotel motel conversions. And I have led over the last 7 years by example to build the most solutions in my district to show that we can do that, to show that we can create these solutions. Unfortunately, we haven't had that equitable distribution throughout the rest of the city. And as mayor, I would ensure that we have that same type of leadership and that equitable distribution of these solutions being built throughout our entire city. Lastly, we need to be able to work better together. I've been fighting to create a homeless task force here in the city of San Jose to ensure that we can bring all the stakeholders together, specifically to address the major underlying issues like mental illness, because it's not the city of San Jose that's going to be able to lead on this solution on their own. We need to work better together, specifically with our county partners. And on this issue of mental health and mental illness, I do support Gavin Newsom's proposal. I do believe that we need to have a more robust effort when it comes to addressing this underlying issue that is permeated not just within our homeless community, but our house community. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. Good evening. I'm Janet Holt, and I'm from the District 8 Roundtable and also the Evergreen Leadership Group. You will each have 3 minutes to respond to the following land use questions. The Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors voted in 2021 to pursue early closure of Reed Hillview Airport instead of 2031. What is your position on the anticipated closure and your vision on the future of the property? What impact would closure have in both near term and long term, both locally and regionally? And what actions would you take related to that? Will be Council Members Davis, Mahan, Peralez, and Supervisor Chavez. Councilperson Davis.
Thank you. I don't support the early closure of the Reed Hillview Airport. I have been particularly involved with and upset about the loss of the ball field for the Eastridge Little League because they contacted me about it just a couple of weeks ago. We will also in the near term lose the location for our Civil Air Patrol, which is an all volunteer group of individuals, and really helping to keep our city safe and prepared for a disaster in our whole region, actually. And the San Jose State University Aviation Program is also housed at Reed Hillview Airport. So all of those things are now in question. But for the Eastridge Little League, I believe they were not able to actually play at those ball fields this year already, even though the airport is still open. Of course, there is a concern about lead levels around that area, but my understanding of this study is that it showed correlation, but not causation. So elevated levels of lead in the blood of people who live nearby, but it's not clear that that's related specifically directly to the airport and the leaded gasoline that's being used by the airplanes there, or whether there is some other common source in the area, like paint or old lead pipes. The study did not test the homes or the water, so that's why when they only tested blood samples, we don't actually know. So that's a flawed study on which to base a very important conclusion that has far-reaching impacts. And I'm very concerned about that. Also, if we close the airport and try to remedy this lead problem, what if the problem continues to persist after the airport is closed? Then that decision has already been made, lives have been disrupted, and we don't have a solution to the elevated lead levels. By the way, the airport has already switched to unleaded fuel to try to address the issue. Locally, I'm very concerned about being able to respond to emergencies. It will put stress on our Mineta, San Jose airport, because they will have to be the backup for emergency landings for small planes in the area. And I want to make sure that there is a plan if that airport is closed for getting emergency supplies into San Jose, especially in the event of a very large and disruptive earthquake. Right now, we have a redundant system within our city. We have 2 possible airports to be able to do those supplies. And we won't have that if Reed-Hillview closes. And for all those reasons, I think that we should stay open. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member Davis. Councilperson Mahan.
Thank you for the question. I also have huge concerns about hastily shutting down the airport without proper stakeholder engagement and a transition plan. I've heard a lot of opinions on various sides of the issue, and certainly it's true that in the long run, if the community truly doesn't support the airport, it will eventually have to move. I mean, we live in a democracy, and I think that is true. But I want to note, first of all, that Reed-Hillview is an incredible asset for our community that we have, I think, undervalued how much it provides us in terms of emergency response, education, recreation. It's a really unique asset for the community. And everyone who's a stakeholder there, Councilor Davis mentioned the Civil Air Patrol and the San Jose State Aviation Program, should be part of the process of mapping out a responsible transition over a reasonable time frame. If the airport has to move, it shouldn't move because there's an election coming up. It should move because it's a deliberate, thoughtful policy decision-making process that involves all of those stakeholders. And we need to have the plans in place to not overly impact San Jose International. We need to make investments at San Martin. We need to identify those funds. It needs to be a deliberate, policy-driven, community-driven process that involves all stakeholders. And I've been disappointed about the way that this process has moved forward over the last couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member Mahan. Council Member Peralez.
Yeah, thank you, Janet. And I imagine Supervisor Chavez will be able to speak more in detail about the history here, but I know enough to say that this certainly isn't something that has happened hastily. In fact, it's been over 30 years where there has been discussions and leadership at the county in an attempt to address an issue, which is really an issue underlying of equity here within our community. And I would agree that this really does require a much more robust engagement with our community. And in fact, I believe that will happen through the leadership of our county supervisors. I was alarmed by the data that surfaced in the report last year on the lead poisoning of our children and community members out in East San Jose. And I did support the county's efforts and their decision last year. And I'm happy that we've already seen significant progress with the removal of leaded fuel, which I can guarantee would never have happened without this discussion and setting a path to right this wrong. I recognize at the same time, there are a lot of complex challenges and impacts to making a decision like this. Number one, the input of the Federal Aviation Administration. And this type of transition, if it actually is to happen, would take years in the making. And during that time, we can absolutely continue to engage with our community to ensure that we are addressing all those potential impacts, the impacts that we know that we have with an airport like this being a backup to SJC for emergency purposes as it is used today, for purposes like San Jose State's Aviation Department. We have time to be able to engage with our community robustly to be able to get to a consensus on this. I will say it's also too early for me to have input on what the potential future of this site may be. That also is going to require, if indeed it was to close, it's going to require deep engagement with our community to be able to hear from them. If it's not an airport that they would like to see here, then what would they like to see? And I would develop my vision around what we hear from the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Peralez and Supervisor Chavez.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you very much for the question. It's a very complex one. And I do just want to start off, Councilmember Mahan, by saying this is not an electoral stunt. And I think you color the long process that the community's had out there by making such a comment. Congresswoman Lofgren, when she was on the Board of Supervisors in the 90s, worked to close the airport because it was an incompatible land use with the people who live around it. Supervisor Alvarado did the same in the 90s because it was an incompatible land use. Within 1.5 miles of Reed Hillview Airport, we have 52,000 people. If that were a city, it would be one of the mid-sized cities in the county overall. And we did a lead study in part because we began discussions about what should happen on this piece of property. And the EPA did a study that demonstrated that Reed Hillview was one of the most damaging airports relative to lead to its community of any airport, any general aviation airport in the country. So the study actually came from the community, both the neighborhoods and the pilots, wanting to know the answer to that question. The person we hired to do this study is a nationally renowned scientist. It was peer reviewed. He was the main author of the Flint, Michigan study. The American Medical Association says there is no acceptable lead level in the blood of children. And what we saw, in fact, was, I think, did demonstrate causation, in part because we saw increases where the wind carried we believe, the lead. As a matter of fact, as part of the action the board took, the action that we've taken is to accept no more airport improvement grants, allowing us to close the airport in 2031. The county took the leadership on not selling any more leaded aviation fuel at either San Martin or Reed Hillview. And we are now working with the FAA because they have created a pilot program called Eagle that is focused on removing lead from avgas because they recognize it is a health issue. Now, in terms of what long-term happens on the property, the county will not sell that property. The goal is to work closely with the community. We'd like to not only preserve the Eastridge Little League because we don't have many fields out in this part of the community, as you all know, but we also want to make sure that that this gives an opportunity for future development around the site. And it will be done all with community input.
Thank you.
By the way, that includes the city of San Jose.
Hi, I'm Jim Carter. Good evening. This is a public safety question. You'll each have 3 minutes to respond. Due to the increase in crime, how do you propose to address the following public safety issues? Increasing traffic deaths, 22 as of this writing, excessive speeding, and sideshows. Please feel free to note any other public safety issues you will prioritize. I will begin with Councilmember Mahan, followed by Councilmember Peralez, followed by Supervisor Chavez, and followed by Councilmember Davis.
Thank you, Jim. Traffic safety has been a huge concern in District 10, as I know it is across the city. We've had just a tremendous amount of speeding and sideshows. And so our office convened a community working group with interested community members, representatives from different neighborhood associations. We worked together to get some funding in the budget for more pole-mounted radar signs. We've worked with our local police captain to collaboratively identify speeding and racing hotspots and increase enforcement at the appropriate times of day. We even worked with DOT to lower the threshold for getting approval to add speed humps in neighborhoods that have become popular cut-throughs for people's commute or at other times of the day when they're speeding through residential neighborhoods. We even put in a proposal and secured funding to test a roundabout at one of our more dangerous intersections. So we've been working collaboratively with community leaders to come up with different approaches to the problem. More broadly on public safety, we are going to have to increase staffing. Public safety is our #1 priority and responsibility as a city. To address it properly, we have to build our budget around police staffing. Growing the staffing of our department will allow us to deploy more officers to our traffic enforcement unit, which was absolutely decimated after the Great Recession and the Measure B battles. I've worked to and really advocated for automatic license plate readers and leveraging technology to supplement what is a thinly staffed force, as we all know. When it comes to pedestrian safety, there's a lot we can do in the built environment. It doesn't have to be that expensive. And again, back to technology, we can partner with companies like Verizon, who we already work with, to analyze data at dangerous intersections, for example, understand where we're having these near misses and come up with the investments and mitigations, whether it's better signage, more enforcement. Even this was not my idea, but the mayor had a clever idea the other day of using technology to know who we should send a letter to let them know that we're paying attention and we're disappointed in them for speeding, even if we're at a time when we can't yet issue tickets. So that's another thing I should mention, which is that we are, of course, advocating at the state level to be exempt from the ban on using cameras to do traffic enforcement. So I think it's ultimately going to come down to proper staffing for traffic enforcement and other types of enforcement in our community, leveraging technology. And then finally, on the kind of ground level perpetual crime, particularly in downtown and our commercial districts, we have to work with the DA and our court system to increase accountability for repeat offenders and those who are violating the terms of their release. Thank you.
Hey, Councilmember Peralez.
Yeah, thank you very much. I actually volunteered to serve as chair of our Vision Zero task force that we initiated because of the rise that we've seen over the last number of years in traffic-related fatalities. And we've been taking on the challenges of traffic-related deaths and injuries very, very seriously. And I believe reducing these incidents is going to take a three-pronged approach. Number one, it's going to require infrastructure improvements and investments in traffic calming mechanisms. Number two, it's going to take law changes, specifically on things like speed cameras or reducing the speed limit. And lastly, it's going to take enforcement. The quick build projects that we've been implementing throughout the city, we've seen success in them, but we haven't collected enough data. That's one of the areas where I'll be asking, and next week, actually chairing our Vision Zero task force meeting, be drilling down to ensure we are doing the right quick build projects in the right areas, the ones that we are seeing the most success out of. We know that we can create more of those solutions simply by adding more resources in the budget. And we've seen a lot of these work in areas like downtown where we piloted them, and we need to utilize those solutions more frequently throughout the entire city. Secondly, law changes. We have been advocating to change laws to make it easier to do things like reduce the speed limit. And I'm proud that that has moved forward, but it is still remaining a challenge. And I think there is still room to improve there. Secondly, we have a recent challenge with getting an opportunity to implement speed cameras in the city of San Jose. And unfortunately, it's actually our local police union, my former union, the POA, that has yet to endorse that solution following the statewide organization PORAC, who also is not in support of this state law that would allow San Jose to implement that pilot. Hence, as Councilmember Mahan was saying, the mayor was talking about sending out warning letters. Well, warning letters aren't going to change people's habits. We need to be able to have the opportunity to implement these speed cameras, and I'm hoping that both PORAC and our local union will get on board with that. Lastly, it's about enforcement. And the only way we're going to get there, and this actually speaks to the challenges that we have in general with addressing public safety, is we still have a lack of resources. We are 250 officers shy of where we were over a decade ago. And I was a police officer at that time when we were one of the most proactive departments addressing these crimes, responding to these calls for service like property crimes, quality of life crimes, the issues that we're seeing today that really go largely unchecked. We need to continue to rebuild our police department. I'm proud that we went from just over 800 to now 1,150, but we need to continue to invest in those resources and rebuilding our department.
Supervisor Chavez.
Thank you, Jim. Let me start where Councilmember Peralez left off. I think there's no substitute for having more officers. And that would be a priority. And I know we're going to talk about budget a little bit later, but that's certainly a priority. I also just want to comment on the issues around technology. I think that's right, that we need to be able to access speed cameras and also license plate readers. And I know that technology really can make a difference, and I've seen it make a difference in other areas of public safety, and I'll hopefully get a chance to talk about that. And then the other is that I think we should think, especially as it relates to sideshows, I think that being able to test and quickly innovate around what kinds of traffic calming helps is really critical. I also think we need to talk to large property owners where sideshows are both happening and gathering to make sure that people are shutting their gates or restructuring their ingress and egress so they're not so easy to access. So there is a role for the private sector and property owners to play as well. Just to speak a little bit about the importance of technology, one of the things that we've done here in the county is that we have reduced our backlog of rape kits, and also we're testing rape kits, I think, faster than any other county in the country. And in part, we're doing that with small investments we made in the crime lab and adding staff that are not badged to be able to make it easier for us to move, for example, rape kits from point A to point B, and making sure that we have the staff available to do that kind of work. You asked also, Jim, just about other kind of priorities. And I think that one of the things I'm really interested in seeing us do is expanding the number of people that can respond to mental health crisis calls instead of just having police do that. The MCRT, I think both the county and the city call this program something different, but it's the same, where we have clinicians and police officers responding to calls together, I think is one really incredible opportunity we have. But the other is that we're piloting a new program that doesn't have a police response at all, that will be a community response. And I think that might be able to take off some of the load from the officers that we have left, allowing them to address more and serious crimes in other areas. And the last thing I'd like to see us do is do a much better job of collaborating the community prosecutor program we have, which I know a number of council members are familiar with, because you have community prosecutors that can work with neighborhoods to really drill down, especially, for example, where you have code enforcement issues that really should be addressed more quickly, because if they're not addressed, it's where you start to get crime, and having the community prosecutors really be able to weigh in and be helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Davis.
Thank you for the question, Jim. We have added about 300 new officers since I have been in office over the last 5+ years. We absolutely need about 250 more officers, and we will have to do that over time. However, I am the only one who was calling at the mayor's March budget message to add more traffic enforcement officers now. That is absolutely what we need. I don't think enforcement comes last. I think enforcement comes first. That also deals with the excessive speeding issue, and they're related, because 30% of the traffic deaths are actually related to excessive speeding. Of course, I support other Vision Zero strategies that my colleagues have talked about, like narrowing streets and traffic calming, bollards and bulb outs, and have worked to implement all of those strategies in my district over the last 5 years. I also support the speed camera law change because we absolutely need to have technology to help us with enforcement. Regarding sideshows, I have worked together with Councilmember Esparza on this issue over the last couple of years. First, to make it illegal to be a spectator at sideshows, and then to go after the promoters and also to test the physical barriers that some of my colleagues have talked about at the highly impacted sites. These efforts have reduced sideshows, but again, enforcement is a big piece of this. PD writes up about 200 citations every time they break up a sideshow, in addition to impounding the participating cars. So it takes a lot of officers to do that. There are so many more public safety issues regarding police officers. We need more police officers for foot patrol in business districts. We need more police officers for our investigations unit so they can solve crimes and get criminals off the streets. And we need to partner our officers with mental health for 24/7 coverage. We currently don't have 24/7 coverage with mental health crisis response teams. In addition, we need more community service officers. They take half the reports at the police department now, and those are the folks who are responding to your burglary calls, your property crimes, and other calls that aren't about life, death, and immediate danger. So we need more of them so that we can have 24/7 coverage of this group as well. We don't need to waste time on measures that won't work to reduce crime, such as the 2 new gun owner mandates that the council put in place recently. I was the only candidate to vote against both of those measures because I believe they're likely unconstitutional and that they will not actually do anything to reduce gun violence in our city. But nobody's talked about fire safety yet, and I hope I still have a little bit more time because we also have thin staffing of our fire department. We just reopened Fire Station 20 at the airport with an expansion plan for the community side at Coleman, and we're about to open Fire Station 37. We have more fire stations to build, and we need to fully staff that department as well. Thank you.
Okay. And thank you all for your responses.
Thank you. I'm Greg Peck from the District 10 Leadership Coalition. And you will each have 2 minutes to respond to our quality of life question. Explain how you're going to address through code enforcement the issues of illegal fireworks and vehicle abandonment throughout the city, and the frustration by neighbors of lack of response or no response to their complaints. Thank you. First, Councilmember Peralez, then Supervisor Chavez, Councilmember Davis, then Councilmember Mahan, excuse me.
Thank you very much. I know we may have over 30 minutes of questions left. I'm on notice to try to help get my son down to bed just after 8. So hopefully we'll get there soon. So I will say code enforcement is not going to be the answer to either of these challenges, unfortunately. When it comes to fireworks, we really have one entity that's going to go out and enforce while that crime is actually occurring to be able to stop it, and that's police officers. When we were adequately staffed, I myself would go out regularly to these calls for service to shut down fireworks shows and confiscate tons of illegal fireworks. That has since gone away over the last 12 years. If we can rebuild our police department, we can get back to proactively enforcing that. Code enforcement is not going to be able to go out and proactively enforce this because it is too dangerous for them to go and respond. Same thing with CSOs. And although we have instituted an online reporting tool, we are citing more people today every year. It is not enough. If we really want to make a dent in the illegal fireworks usage, we need to be able to beef up our police resources so that they can respond to those calls for service once again. Specifically with vehicle abatement, it has really been hit tremendously hard throughout the last 2 years in the pandemic, and we've seen that and we've heard the frustrations from our community. But again, this is being led through our vehicle abatement team with the Department of Transportation, or the other entity is through our police department with police officers or CSOs. And so once again, we've add resources to those departments, we can be able to get back to abating vehicles like we were pre-pandemic. Our Department of Transportation Vehicle Abatement team is still rebuilding from the pandemic, and that has been the biggest impact that we have had. This is really a lack of resource issue, and we need to be able to add to that to address those challenges. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Peralez. Supervisor Chavez.
Thank you for the question, Greg. You know, doing a little homework on this, I did not realize that there were 60,000 calls a year for abandoned vehicles. And that's huge. And so part of what it got me thinking a little bit about was whether or not it made sense for us to figure out a way to help people who want to get rid of extra vehicles and abandoned vehicles, make it easier for them to do that. And so one thing I would like to give a little more thought to that and get anybody who's in the community listening to this to get your ideas on that as well. I think one big issue, and I just want to really reinforce what Councilmember Peralez said, and that is that we obviously need more and Councilmember Davis, obviously we need more public safety officers, and we also need to really, I think, engage the community to make this more of a dumpster day kind of a approach than just a complaint-based approach as it relates to the to vehicles. As it relates to illegal fireworks, I know that I have worked on an ordinance, and I know that the city changed their ordinance as well to have a social host component to the ordinance. I think the challenge is honestly that we need to be looking at a task force, perhaps between the sheriffs and San Jose PD, so that we can use and marshal resources to do a much better job of going after the big offenders. Lastly, on the fireworks, I'll tell you when we started to see a huge uptick in fireworks usage, it's when we stopped doing the downtown fireworks in 2008, not even more recently. And so reestablishing locations all across the city where neighbors and communities can reclaim that age-old 4th of July, you go to the park, you have a safe firework experience, I think is going to be really, really critical to make sure that we're doing that citywide and not just in downtown San Jose.
Thank you, Supervisor Chavez. Councilmember Davis.
Thank you. We do need to fill all the vacancies in our code enforcement division. We actually have a lot of vacancies right now, and I know that has led to frustration because I am hearing it on a very regular basis, maybe not daily, but certainly many times a week from my residents. Filling the vacancies would help a lot. We also need to fully staff our vehicle abatement program. Councilmember Peralez talked about that. It's currently housed in the Department of Transportation through parking compliance. And we as a council have already told the DOT they need to come back to us with a redesign of the current vehicle abatement process because it has, it changed during the pandemic as we knew that multiple people, a lot of people weren't really driving around for a while. So we suspended activity and went to a different model to really look for the most blighted vehicles. But it is a frustratingly slow ramp up to get back to where we are doing proactive, looking for blighted vehicles, but then also doing a proactive full citywide parking compliance program. And we need to get back to that. Code enforcement needs go beyond staffing. However, a couple of years ago, I worked through the budget process to get a city attorney to be dedicated to litigating the worst code offenders. And we are just starting to bear fruit with that work now because the courts are reopened. And we also need to look at our fine structure and make sure that they are high enough to deter repeat offenses. We've already done that with fireworks, but Supervisor Chavez was right. It's not just about enforcement for fireworks. Catching people in the act is very difficult, but it is important for us to have an alternative. And that's why I did ask in last year's budget to fund the fireworks program again for this 4th of July. And I'm pleased to say we will have fireworks back. The planning is already underway.
Thank you.
For a fireworks display this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Davis. Councilmember Mahan.
Thanks for the question. I think that code enforcement has been neglected and deprioritized for far too long. And in fact, I would go so far as to say that certain code enforcement functions we should seriously consider looking at moving certain code enforcement functions under SJPD, pulling in community service officers to fill part of that role if we can't get DOT to adequately address the abandoned vehicle problem, because there is a nexus between some code enforcement violations and other and actual criminality. And we are encouraging our police force to get to know the community, to do more community policing. We're investing in foot patrols. And I think we need better integration and collaboration between those entities. I'm not 100% convinced that moving it under SJPD is the answer, but if we can't get the results that we need, I think we have to seriously look at that, because there has to be accountability for results. And we have really, as a city, been failing to deliver on that core service of addressing abandoned vehicles. And it's, in truth, they're not all abandoned. It's often somebody who owns 10 vehicles, some of which are broken down, in which case we need to actually enforce the 72-hour rule around parking. And so there's a lot of nuance to it, but it's got to be connected to the folks who are actually out there in the community, building relationships and maintaining and addressing quality of life issues in the neighborhoods. On the fireworks, I have advocated for pulling the reporting into 311, not because that's a panacea, but because I think we need to have better data visibility. In terms of citations, actually, while we had a lot of reports last year, we issued very few citations. And I think we should have community service officers be part of the solution, because we need more boots on the ground, pre-positioned around the city, particularly in the days around the 4th of July. And we have to be much more proactive about citing. Thank you.
Thank you all for your responses to that question. Thank you.
Hi, Gary, and the rest of the leadership group members. We're shifting due to time constraints. There's a preference now for 1-minute questions. So from now on, it will be 1-minute questions along with 30-second closing statements. And so that applies to Gary's question, Linda's question, and Babu's question. Babu, your question is consolidated with a closing statement. Apologies, but that seems to be the consensus, that we need to reduce it down to 1 minute. So remaining questions, 1 minute, 30-second closing statement. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Gary Cunningham, District 1 Leadership Group. This is a lot to handle in 1 minute, but unfortunately, that's the way it is. You'll each have 1 minute to respond to a budget question. The budget defines the direction of the city. The current mayor's budget message runs 24 pages long and highlights hundreds of items. As mayor next year, what are some of the main items you would keep in the budget at current levels? What new items would you introduce and/or current items increase? And what would you decrease or eliminate to pay for them? Or would you seek increased funding? We'll start the responses with Supervisor Cindy Chavez, followed by council members Deb Davis, Matt Mahan, and Paul Peralez.
Thank you, Gary. And you're right, not an easy one in 1 minute. What I would say is that I would be very interested in increasing public safety officers and also code enforcement. I would also want to make sure that we maintained the investment that we have in housing and homelessness, but with a much deeper partnership with the county, so that frankly, we know what each other are spending, how we're spending it, so that we might better leverage each other's investments. The other is that I think it's really important to recognize that the mayor has an opportunity, working with other mayors across the state and across the country, to seek changes in both state and federal funding. You know, cities don't get very much actually from state and federal funds. And I think based on what we've just experienced through COVID, that there's an opportunity to leverage that experience to continue to bring resources back that would allow us to expand other programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Davis.
You. My budgets will focus on rebuilding public safety, tackling homelessness and blight, and ensuring a thriving economy. We need more officers, as we've already talked about, and so I'm not going to cover that too much, but it is really important for us to be able to respond appropriately to the 911 calls about mentally ill people. And so we absolutely have to expand our pairing of officers with mental health workers. We need to make sure our fire stations, especially our new fire stations, are fully staffed. And in terms of tackling homelessness, we need to take a comprehensive look at everything we're doing and focus as much as possible on what we must do as a city, which is provide safety and sanitation, and enlist the county's partnership on what they are responsible for. And those are the services: mental health, drug addiction, and outreach. I agree, we absolutely need to fund homelessness prevention as well, and that saves money in the long run by keeping people housed. In terms of tackling
Thank
blight,
you.
Thank you. Councilmember Mahan.
Thank you. My top priorities are ending street homelessness, increasing public safety, and cleaning up our city. And my budget will be focused and reflect those priorities. But more importantly, the way I approach the budget, based on my experience actually managing budgets, is that I have insisted upon, in fact, my colleagues just agreed with my memo stating that we need to set objective measures of success at the front end of the budget process. And then all of the ideas in the budget, whether it's from the mayor, from other council members, from departments, or from the public, needs to be aligned around the objective measures of success that are how we know if we're doing a good job or not. We need to know which dollars we're spending are actually having an impact. I will invest heavily in performance metrics and creating feedback loops so that we're getting more impact around those priorities for each dollar of public money that we're spending. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Peralez.
And thank you. We have a very lean budget every year, and it's challenging really to say that there's anything that we should be eliminating from that base budget. What we really need are new resources to be able to add to our budget. And in fact, I've been in line with our mayor's budget proposals every year except for one, and that was 3 years ago when the mayor would not incorporate funding for addressing equity issues here in the city. I would seek to increase funding for addressing specifically homelessness and then enhancing our public safety services like police and fire. And I would seek out capacity increases in our businesses, like implementing Measure H from 2 years ago, which was an increase on our card rooms that our mayor did not support, but that had an opportunity to generate an additional $40 million per year. And unfortunately, it's now held up at the state. And I would help to unstick that and continue to add resources to the city.
Thank you, all of you, for responding to that budget question in a relatively short time. Thanks again.
Hello, I'm Linda Locke from District 4. You each will have 1 minute to respond to our arts question. The arts community relies on the transient occupancy tax, the TOT, for funding. It will take time for revenues to return to pre-pandemic attendance levels. Do you plan to provide additional funding to our arts community in the interim? And would you take steps to make San Jose an arts destination? We'll start with Deb Davis.
thank you. We have already provided additional funding to the arts community with our federal relief funds. And I would like to say, yes, we'll be able to keep doing that. But unfortunately, the reality is that we probably will run out of those funds before TOT comes back. I do think that we need to encourage our tourist industry so that our TOT does come back. And I have supported artists through my office, through sponsoring murals, and also connecting artists with the business community for murals on their private property as well. I very much support our arts, and I do think that our murals in our city are one of our best kept secrets. I think as mayor, I would work with Team San Jose to publicize this amazing resource that we have in our community. I've been proud to work with Councilmember Peralez to bring our sonic runway back to City Hall on a semi-permanent basis, which I hope will actually ultimately become a permanent structure. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Matt Mahan.
Thank you for the question. And there's no doubt that arts are a huge part of what makes any community, and especially our downtown, just a special and unique place where people want to spend time. Obviously, we have to have priorities that are trade-offs. We face very significant trade-offs around public safety, code enforcement, roads, core services. I think the real opportunity over the next year or two, as we're waiting for TOT funding to rebound, is for the mayor to be a convener and facilitator and get the private sector to the table and ensure that those developers and investors and business owners who are enlightened and understand the benefit to attracting people downtown put some dollars behind and help facilitate. And we can do our part through streamlining permitting, making space available. I think there are a lot of tools we have besides just throwing money at things. And as important as the money is, it's in short supply now as federal funds disappear. So we're gonna have to be a convener and engage the private sector to really to fill that gap for the next couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you for that response. The next is Raul Peralez.
And thank you very much, Linda. I was the only council member to clarify that our mayor's budget message intended to fully backfill these funds when we discussed his budget proposal earlier this month. I am aware of how important these funds are to our community, and I fully intend to ensure that those funds are backfilled once again this coming year. I am also supportive of amending our current TOT formula in order to be able to allocate even more regular funding every year to support our arts and cultural organizations, specifically because we know that the TOT funds will not be back up to 100%, likely for a couple years, but we can readjust that formula and ensure that more of those resources are going directly to these arts and cultural organizations because they are so important to the health and the economy here in San Jose.
Thank you. Next, Cindy Chavez.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you very much for the question. You know, the arts are not just critical to downtown, they're critical to all of San Jose. And in part because they're such an important component of helping people fall in love with the place that they live, making sure it's part of our education system and all of that. One of the things that I would be supportive of is looking at our excess ending fund balance to invest in the arts, because I look at that both as an education and a tourism and an economic, frankly, not an economic engine per se, but definitely it contributes to our overall economic engine because of the way it contributes to tourism. So I want to prioritize the arts, and I think this is, in tough times, it's the easiest thing to toss out, which is why it's so important we fight to keep it funded.
Thank you, all of you, for your answers. Thank you very much. Good. Babu, you're up.
Yeah. Hello.
We can hear you, Babu. We can't see you.
I'm not able to open my camera. That's why I'm looking that one. Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Babu. I'm from District 2. You will each have 1 minute to respond and 30 seconds for closing statement. And my question is regarding housing. What is your position on affordable housing, SB 9, Senate bill, and COPA, Community Opportunity to Purchase Act? What impact does placement of housing have on equity? And I'll begin with Council Member Mahan, followed by Supervisor Cindy Chavez. Hello, sorry. Followed by Cindy Chavez, followed by Raul Peralez, followed by Dave Davis. So I'll begin with Mahan.
Sorry, Bobby, I thought you were finished. My apology.
No problem.
I oppose SB 9 and opportunity housing. I was the first council member to host a press conference outlining my opposition to a zoning proposal that kind of throws planning out the window, doesn't take into account the traffic and environmental impacts, the displacement risk, and the unique fiscal challenges we face as a city that is already a residential heavy and relatively low density city. And so I think we need smart growth that is centered on transit, that is mixed use and walkable communities. We need to put housing and jobs on and near our transit centers so that we can scale up without damaging the quality of life that our existing neighborhoods have. We can make room and still protect our existing neighborhoods. Just quickly, hard to do in a minute, on COPA. The example, I oppose it. I think we've seen in San Francisco that it's had very little impact, but it has added a lot of friction to the real estate market. And I don't think that level of regulation is justified for the benefit that it delivers. I think there are much better ways to enable nonprofits to help preserve affordable housing supply in our community. And I'm sure I'm out of time, but
Closing statement, please.
Yeah, 30 seconds.
30 seconds for closing. Go ahead, Matt. Right? Is that
Council
how it is?
member.
Oh, are we
Council member,
combining
you have
them?
30 seconds for closing statement. Yeah.
I
Council
didn't
member
realize they were
Mahan, Council member
Okay,
Mahan, you have
thanks.
30 seconds for closing statement.
Okay, sorry, I did not realize they were combined. Look, the bottom line is you've heard a lot of similar ideas here. I think there is a lot of overlap, but the key is that we have to change the way that we're operating at City Hall. We have to set measurable goals. We have to use performance metrics. You should be able to go to the city website and see how we're performing on core services. And we need to focus, prioritize, and make the tough trade-offs to deliver the core services that you deserve. And it's especially important given our small budget. I want to tie our future pay raises to how we perform because you deserve that level of accountability from your elected officials. Thank you.
Next, Supervisor Cindy Chavez.
Thank you. As it relates to SB 9, one of the challenges with SB 9, and there are many, is that it treats San Jose the same way it treats Cupertino. And San Jose has been so much more responsible in terms of building affordable housing there's no sliding scale. So that's actually one problem. The other problem is that it's intended to not negatively impact renters, but there's no enforcement mechanism. There's no real way to manage that. And the other is I do think it could have a very significant impact in some neighborhoods and not in others, especially because of access to sewage and other things that are going to be impacted depending on how built out the community gets. As it relates to COPA, COPA it's an interesting idea. I think in an area that's as expensive as ours, my question is, how will we pay for it? How will we afford to be able to buy so many properties? Thank you.
Supervisor, you have a 30 seconds for closing statement.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to say a couple things. One, I really appreciate how many people have stayed with us. There's almost 193 of you still with us, and that just shows such a commitment to our community. Second, I can honestly say that I think that, we're blessed to live in a place where we have so many people interested in serving the public. I'm running because I believe that genuine leadership can save lives, has saved lives, will improve our community. I would be honored to work with you as mayor.
Thank you. Next, I will request Council Member Raul Peralez.
Yeah, thank you, Babu. I am proud to be the only candidate that supports SB 9, and I am supportive of COPA. We're still in the early stages of that policy, but I have been supportive of it and look forward to that discussion coming back later this year to the council. Both are modest policies that will help to address this housing crisis that we know that we have. They're just tools in the toolbox, and we know right now we need to make great use of every tool that we have, and they should not be feared by our community. I personally grew up in a working class family in a rent controlled fourplex that would be considered opportunity housing today. And it allowed me to attend the same school district from K through 12. And I can assure you that it's an equity issue, and that had it not been for having that housing stability, I would not be where I am at today. I'm sorry. Thank you. I'll transition now.
Okay.
So thank you again as well to everybody for being here tonight. I'm running because I want to be able to address our biggest challenges head on, to create comprehensive solutions to address homelessness and our affordable housing crisis. I want to be able to make San Jose the safest big city in America again, while also reimagining how we police our communities, especially communities of color that have endured systemic racism for decades. And I want to be able to help our small businesses and our economy thrive and get back on its feet. I know that working with all of you, we can build a city for all of us. And I thank you again for your participation tonight.
I'll moving next. Council Member Dave Davis.
Thank you, Babu. First, I think it's important to note that I have supported every affordable housing project that has come before the City Council, and I routinely request additional units in the affordable housing developments that come to my district. And that is because I think it is important for us to address housing affordability. And I want to be clear that affordable housing in this instance is actually subsidized housing. I opposed SB 9 and COPA because those measures do nothing to actually address housing affordability. Councilmember Pam Foley and I were actually the first council members to publicly oppose this idea when it came forward as a citywide elimination of single-family home zoning before SB 9 came to the state. And I opposed it going through the state legislature as well. I am leading in San Jose the ballot initiative that is now being targeted for 2024 to take back local control of land use decisions. COPA will unfortunately only delay the sale of residential properties in the open market. All right.
Councilmember, you have 30 seconds for closing statement.
Thank you. I started tonight by saying our big problems only get bigger. But when we work together, our big problems can actually be opportunities. With the rebuilding of the police department, we have the opportunity to be a safer city. We can protect single-family home zoning and have the opportunity to be a city of togetherness and diversity. And with joint efforts to tackle homelessness, we have the opportunity to be a city that is clean and thriving. Thank you for listening this evening. I ask for your support for me, Dev Davis, for mayor, and you can learn more at devdavis.com. Thank you.
Thank you, all of you. Going back to Juan, Estrada.
Oh, thank you everyone for joining tonight. Thank you all for staying so late. Thank you to the candidates for participating. I wish you all good night. Bye.
Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
All of you.